for those of you who don't know me. And my topic today is dispelling the myths about Shia Muharram practices, like Matam, why do we do it? Is it based on the practices of the Ahlul Bayt? Or is it cultural? Do we do it because we are Pakistanis or Indians or Afghani? So we need to go back and find out where we got those practices from. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of history, my own history. So I converted from the Ahlul Sunnah school of thought. So I was a Sunni before and I changed to the Shia school of thought. I became a follower of the Ahlul Bayt. Because I learned about the Shia ideology. I was in high school when the Islamic Revolution of Iran took place. And at that time, Imam Khomeini was a very magnetic personality that attracted me to who is this people who is doing this revolution. They call themselves the country of Iran. They call themselves the Islamic Republic of Iran. At a time when most of the Muslims around the world, they are shy to say they are Muslims. They were doormats to the Western world. But this country was calling themselves the Islamic Republic of Iran in this modern day and time. I thought nobody calls themselves Islamic. We are shy to say we are Muslims. So I felt, who are these people? Why are they so proud? How come they are so strong? That made me ask, who is Shia? I had never met a Shia in my life. And I was about high school. So then I started asking these questions. What gave them the pride in their religion? What makes them proud of their religion? To be confident enough to say, we are Islamic, we are Muslims, and our country is an Islamic Republic. Modern day, nobody calls themselves Islamic. So that was interesting for me. It led me to research about Shiaism. I learned about Karbala for the first time, and I was horrified. I was shock horror. It made me investigate what happened in history. So I was horrified to find out how much of history has been hidden in Islamic history, how much of it has been hidden by the people. 95% of the Muslims practice the Muslim rulers' version of Islam. So whatever the Muslim rulers of those times allowed you to practice, that's the Islam that 95% of Muslims are practicing around the world. Like, my family is still Sunni, my parents are still Sunni, my siblings are still Sunni. I'm the only one Shia. So until now I have been practicing as a Sunni, prayer, fast. We are very serious about our prayer, very serious about Quran, very serious about taharat and najasat, those kind of things. And then suddenly I'm changing the way I'm seeing the world, the way I'm seeing the religion. So when I found out that Shias follow only the narrations of the Holy Prophet, all their hadiths go directly back to the Prophet. It doesn't go to a Sahaba, it doesn't go to somebody else, it goes directly to the household of the Prophet. And that was very refreshing to me, because I wanted to know about Islam from the people from the house in which those verses were revealed. I didn't want to know about Islam from the person on the street. Like somebody in the marketplace said something, I don't want to hear that religion. I want to know the people who actually were involved in revealing it. So the chain of narrations lead directly to the holy guardians. So I found out that after the Holy Prophet, the prophethood ends. There's no more prophet. But there are guardians of the religion. So after Allah completed His favor and perfected Islam for us, Surah Ma'idah verse 3, it says, I have completed my favor unto you and I have perfected for you, chosen for you a religion called Islam. We need guardians now to protect that completed religion, and that is the 12 Imams. So we have 12 Imams over a period of 250 years. We have 12 Imams. So actually, if you look at the lives of 12 Imams, it's like you're looking at the life of one person after the Prophet, because they're identical to each other, but they lived over a period of 250 years. So anyway, cutting that short, through this ideology, I discovered what Islam really was. I found out that this religion is a revolutionary one, an inqilabi one. It's not a passive religion. This religion, the original message, I found out that this is the original Islam, is both proactive and reactive. So we work before something happens. We are proactive in doing something, and we also react to something. So which means that we are an alive religion. We are not a dead religion. We need to be live to respond to different situations. Islam expects each Muslim to support the truth and to stand up for justice. It expects each Muslim to prevent evil, to prevent the spreading of lies, spreading of untruth, and stop injustice, not just to human beings, but to all the creatures, even the environment. The ideology was wholly satisfying to me because I changed, and that was why I changed. It satisfied all my questions. And that's why I changed my path to that of the Ahlul Bayt, and I did it in Sydney, in our Imam Barga. So that's where I was asking these questions. Before we had MWA, we had CAMC, yes. Thanks be to Allah, whose mercy and kindness allowed me to choose the path which He chose for me. So I had many questions about Shia practices during Muharram. So it was very important to me that I find out the original message. I was not going to change from one religion and come to another religion and just follow it. I wanted to make sure that if I'm changing it, because it's going to affect my position in the next life. So I had to be sure that I was doing the right thing. So I had to make a most informed decision. So I did my research. So the morning practices of Azadari, that Azadari means, Aza means grief, and Azadari is practices during Muharram, the sorrow that we express. So I attended the local Shia centers, both in Urdu, in Farsi, and in English. And I observed that the programs were conducted in a systematic way. So you'll have, for example, like we read today, we have Hadith Kissa, and then we'll have some Salam or Mankabat or some sad poetry, and then we'll start a majlis. So the majlis always starts with the way I started it. You praise Allah first, and then you praise Ahlul Bayt, you praise the Quran, and then you say a verse from the Quran, and then you start it. It's a systematic way. So it made me think, who set the systematic way? Who told us that we should do it in this way? So I found out that in some gatherings, so if I went to the Farsi speaking center, their matam was different. And like Urdu matam was Urdu speaking center. English matam was again different. English in the sense that because our children are now second generation, they don't speak the languages that we speak, so they go to English speaking center. So their matam was again different. So my question was, is the custom of mourning Imam Hussein alayhi salam, is it an innovation? Did we develop it over the centuries, over 14 centuries? Or was it something that the Prophet practiced? Was it something that the Prophet's descendants practiced? Was it something the family of the Prophet practiced after the Prophet passed away? So for example, when weeping, we carry a tabut, or we carry a tazia. We conduct a majlis, we do matam, and all of these things different for different people. So do the Iranians do the same thing? Do the Iraqis do the same thing? Do the Pakistanis do the same thing? Do Indians do the same thing? Why is it slightly different? Everyone does something. Like in Iraq, they don't do this, the women do this, or they do this. That's their way of doing matam. So there were slight differences. So I wanted to know, what is the original version? So I noticed that a few men gathered on Ashura Day, and they cut themselves with swords and blades. Is tatbir or zanjir matam, right? So I wanted to know that they were more open and they were more overt. They have a more provocative display of mourning. So they are more in your face. Whereas the rest of us, we might just do matam like this. Other ladies do matam harder. Some ladies do matam with both hands. So, the different ways of doing it. Which one is right? Um, it didn't matter because you're grieving for Imam Hussein. It doesn't matter how you're doing it. But what I wanted to know was some of the practices caused controversy. The Marjas were saying, don't do it, don't do takbir, don't do zanjeer, whatever. So why are people still doing it? And the Marjas is saying, we discourage you to do it. So I wanted to know what the limits were. You had this limit to this limit. What's the limit in between? What should I be doing? Because I'm the one who changed the religion. I don't want to follow the Pakistani culture. I don't want to follow Indian culture. I don't want to follow any culture. I want to follow the original one. My Shia friends could not answer my question. So I used to ask the ladies in Imam Garga. They couldn't answer me because they have come from a cultural background. You've seen your parents do it. Your grandparents do it. You never thought about we shouldn't be should be doing it. So the Shia friends were not good for answering these questions. So I was asking, would the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, would they have done takbir? Did they do Zanjir Matam? Or whatever it's called. What's the other one called? Zani? Is it? Zanjir Zani, is it? Yeah, that one, right. So I wanted to know if the Ahlul Bayt themselves had done it. Was it an innovation? Was this practice exclusive to some Shia communities or did all Shia communities do it? I was still learning about the immaculate personality and the infallibility of the Ahlul Bayt. I searched for reports about their conduct. How did they conduct themselves during Muharram? I was aware that the present day Ahlul Sunnah scholars, they conditioned the minds of the people about the Shia ideology, and they said that Shia practices were innovations and they were deviations. I needed to explain the truth of mourning, whether it was based on religion or culture, for myself. I needed to satisfy myself. So the criteria for looking at this, I found out that the criteria for looking at it is not whether the Prophet practiced it or whether Ahlul Bayt practiced it. It is whether Allah Himself in the Quran tells us to practice it. That's the original source, isn't it? Because as we know, Hadith may not always be exactly accurate because of the time that has passed between the Prophet's Hadith and us. So in the Quran, does it talk about mourning? Does it talk about azadari? Does it talk about all of these practices in the Quran? And listen to what I found. In the rituals of mourning, to establish the remembrance of the immortal tragedy of Karbala, to express one's gift, I felt that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through religious law, has made us committed to remember always the servants that were closest to Him. In Surah Fatiha, for example, in Surah Fatiha when we recite Siratul Mustaqim, and we say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, Ihdinas Siratal Mustaqim, guide us to the straight path. Ihdinas Siratal Mustaqim, Siratal Ladina, again he repeats Siratal Ladina 2 times. Siratal Ladina an'amta alayhim, the path of those whom you have bestowed ni'mat, you have given blessings, not the path of those with whom you are angry, and not of the path of those who have gone the wrong way. So, in Surah Fatiha is saying, and we recite it at least 10 times in our daily prayers. Inside Surah Fatiha it says, follow the path of those with whom I am happy. So it means that, this tells me that if we don't really know those personalities, how are we going to follow them? If we don't know what they practiced and how they conducted themselves, how are we going to follow them? And so then we must know the path of those, we should also know the path of those with whom Allah is angry with, so that we don't follow that path. So I understood that if we don't honor and respect all aspects of the lives of Allah's chosen servants, then we do not realize what we are asking for in the above verse. So by understanding this, whatever reminds us of the Ahlul Bayt is what Allah is saying, that I consider that these are signs of the religion, signs of Allah. These are symbols of the religion. So whatever reminds you of the Ahlul Bayt, Allah is saying, follow it. Whatever, and not anybody, just Ahlul Bayt. Nabis, the prophets of Islam, the Rasuls and the Nabis who have come before us, and the Ahlul Bayt. The Ahlul Bayt is the one that is closest to us. So we refer. In Surah Hajj, verse 33. Surah Hajj is chapter 22, verse 33. O you who believe, do not violate the signs appointed by Allah, nor the sacred month, nor the offering. So this one is talking about in Hajj. But it says that you have to honor the signs of Allah. This is why for in some countries, before we do the Qurbani for Eid al-Adha, you put flowers for them. I don't know if in Afghanistan you do it or in Pakistan you do it, but in Iraq they do it. They put flowers for the animals. This is because we have to honor the offering. This is the verse that tells us to respect and honor the offering before you cut the animal, before you slaughter the animal. So Allah says, O you who believe, and He's talking to mu'mins, O you who believe, not to Muslims, to mu'mins. Do not violate the signs appointed by Allah. And there's another verse in Surah Hajj, verse 6. It says, whoever respects the sign of Allah, that is indeed only the people who are pious. Only the people who have taqwa will respect the signs of Allah. So if you're doing Azadari and you're doing all the matam and you're doing tabut and you're doing taziyah and whatever it is else that we do, we have, for example, all of these symbols. This is because we respect this tells us a story, doesn't it? It tells us immediately as you see the horse, it tells you about Imam Hussein. So we're respecting those signs because it leads us to Ahlul Bayt, and Ahlul Bayt leads us to the right religion. For example, in the Quran, another example from the Quran is talks about, in which verse is that? Surah Baqarah, 248, talks about Prophet Harun, Prophet Musa and Prophet Harun, that the Bani Israel, after Prophet Musa and Harun died, the Bani Israel people who was the Ummah of Prophet Harun and Prophet Musa, they used to carry something like the tabut. They used to carry an ark of tranquility. They had inside that was the box in which Prophet Musa as a baby was pulled from the water by the Pharaoh's wife. And inside that box, they had the turban of Prophet Harun, the stick of Prophet Musa, and what else? And some of the remaining things of them. The prophets have died and gone, but the people carried it. In the Quran, it says that that was valuable. Why would a stick or a cradle, a baby's cradle, or a stick for walking, or a turban, why is it useful? But Allah says it reminds you of the Prophet. And when you're reminded of the Prophet, you will not deviate from the religion. You will go straight. Very important. So that gives you an example of what we are doing. So Allah is giving you the example of the Quran and it's leading us to, in Surah Baqarah 248 it was, these were the heavenly tablets sent by Allah to Prophet Musa, the turban of Prophet Harun, even his slippers were there, and the casket in which Prophet Musa's mother had kept him as a baby. So similar to this, another example is Hajj. All the actions in Hajj are symbolic. Nothing to related to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala. Nothing related to Prophet Muhammad or his family. Nothing related to the Imam. Everything in Hajj is related to one lady, an African slave lady who became the wife of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Not even a prophet. Her running up and down for water, Safa Marwa. The Tawaf is in Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Ismail. Arafah, Mina, it's all related to Prophet Ibrahim. Nothing to do with our Prophet. Why are we honoring that? So it tells us that it's all symbolic. So symbols are important in religion. Again, we come back to the symbols are important in religion. What brings you back to the Ibrahimic religion, because Prophet Ibrahim established that the original Tawheed religion, that from where we come from. Of course, all prophets did, but this was the refining of the religion. Prophet Ibrahim started off with the refining of the religion. Hajj has, so from this I understood that it's Allah's ancient practice. Allah has a sunnah himself. The sunnah of Allah is old from before our prophet, from before the other prophets. It helps to keep the memory of past events alive. All of this is memory for us to keep alive. So what we remember Karbala through this. Similarly, we remember other things by remembering the symbol. And and that Allah continues this habit till today. He will continue it to the day of judgment. It's not just like in the past. Allah continues that. But the condition now is that it should all be related to Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Everything that we're doing should be then no invention. So if you decide that something else, for example, we honor Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. You know the what is it called? Yeah, curry, right? We have curry on the carrying it on the pocket. Some people pick the curry and put it because they're not well, or they make a hajat or something. All of that is important because that relates us directly back to Imam Zujjar, so that we don't lose that connection. So I wanted to find out if the mourning of Imam Hussein is included in the event. So is the Azadari for Imam Hussein done by the Holy Prophet? We know that, yes. The Prophet mourned Hazrat Hamza alayhi salam. So Hazrat Hamza died in Uhud, was martyred, became shaheed in Uhud, in the battle of Uhud. And the Prophet, Hazrat Hamza had not got married. So a lot of people had died had been martyred in Uhud. And the Prophet, our Prophet was saying, is there nobody to mourn for Hamza, my uncle? Because there's no ladies in his family to mourn for him. So the ladies of Medina heard this, and they all gathered together and went to Hazrat Hamza's house, and they mourned, and they cried, and they recited poetry. Even the Prophet recited poetry for Hazrat Hamza. So it shows that, let me see where it goes. Yeah. I learned that the Prophet himself had performed the mourning for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. For example, the story, the hadith is like this. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, one day I came to the Holy Prophet and I said, I came to the Holy Prophet and the Holy Prophet said to me, he was in tears. And Imam Ali says, who has hurt you? Why are you in tears? And the Prophet said, a little while ago, Jibreel told me that Hussein will be slain, will be killed on the banks of the Euphrates, of the river Furat. Jibreel asked me, would I like to get some soil from that place so that I can smell it? And the Prophet said, yes, I would like that. Jibreel extended his hand and he picked up a handful of soil, due to which tears filled my eyes. The Prophet is telling him, Imam Ali alayhi salam. From this I understood that weeping for Imam Hussein is a practice of the Prophet, it's a sunnah of the Prophet. He was very upset when he heard the forecast that Imam Hussein is going to die, or is going to be martyred, but he asked for some soil. He was not satisfied with being told that Imam Hussein is going to be shaheed. He wanted some soil, so he wanted something to increase his grief, which is why we do what we do. We need to increase our grief. The emotions have to increase, and that's why he wanted to smell the soil. When he smelt the soil, he smelled Imam Hussein. So he knew that it would make him cry, and that's why he cried. He didn't cry first, he cried after he smelled the soil. So this is why I understood from that you need something to make you cry, which is why we recite Nohas. Make us cry more, which is why we do, what is it else we do? Yeah, we read before we start, we have the sad poetry that the ladies read before the majlis. It sets the atmosphere for the majlis. Yeah? So all of this is part of the Muharram practices. It increases our emotions of grief, and we would be perfectly following the sunnah of the Holy Prophet. And in the Prophet you have an excellent example, Surah Ahzab, verse 23. And what else? We talked about that. Even Karbala, after Karbala, I understood that because of Hazrat Hamza's, the ladies were crying for Hazrat Hamza, and the Prophet praised those ladies, and he blessed them and their generations because they had gone collectively and they were crying loudly. So sometimes we ask, are we allowed to cry loudly, or should we cry silently? The ladies were crying loudly, and the Prophet praised that act, which means we are allowed to cry loudly. Maybe not so that the men will hear us, but we are allowed to cry in our own circles. Yeah? I came to understand that the wailing of a large number of people is an act that is allowed because it is in accordance with the direction of the Prophet. Similarly, Bibi Zainab and Bibi Kulthum, Salamullah alayha, after the tragedy of Karbala, they wrote poems to make the people, not only did they tell them about Karbala, but they wrote poems to make the emotions more intense. And the Imams of the Ahlul Bayt have left traditions that they arranged for and paid money to people to read majlis or to read poetry or to read Noha. They actually paid money to other people, just like we ask people to come and read, please come and read, but the Imams paid money for that. So it is recommended that we also pay money to our Noha Khans. We should pay money to the people who recite, because it's a practice. You know how we say they should do it for free? They shouldn't be doing it for free. They should be paying for it, because the Prophet paid for it.
At the same time, they shouldn't make a commercial like
That's a limit. There's a limit, yeah? So, yeah. So Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam said, every weeping and lamentation is makruh except the weeping and lamentation for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So when our parents die, we shouldn't, for example, parents is closest to us, God protect them, keep their lives long. But it's not recommended for them. It's makruh to cry and make a big noise when our closest ones die. Except for Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we are allowed to cry loud. So in some cultures, drums are played. In Iran, for example, they play drums. Iraq also, when I went to Karbala, Arba'in, they play the drums. So you know how in Pakistan and India we say don't play the drums? Well, in there they do it. In the Haram they do it. In the top of the Haram they play the drums in Iran. So all of that, some of them have dramas and tableaus that you can watch. Karbala, the incidents of Karbala, different aspects of Karbala, it's allowed because it increases. Children can understand it better if they see it. It's a visual aid, like we do, an audible aid. It's all part of learning and teaching, as teachers know. So that's it. So all the things associated with the chosen ones of Allah are signs of Allah Himself. That's the conclusion that we are making from here. The signs that are associated with the chosen servants of Allah are actually leading back to Allah, and therefore they are a sign of Allah Himself. And then we go back to Surah Hajj for that, because people who respect the signs of Allah are those who have taqwa in their hearts. And we need taqwa in our hearts. Muttaqeen, we become muttaqeen when we follow that. And Surah Al-Baqarah says, this Quran has been revealed for the muttaqeen, not for everybody, only the people who have taqwa. That is a catch point. That concludes this. I wanted to read a brief history of Hazrat Abbas, Abol Fadhl Abbas ibn Ali alayhi salam. So, Hazrat Abbas, so for those of us who, some people here may not know who Hazrat Abbas is, so I shall give a brief history as if we don't know, right? So everybody can get on, their children also. So Hazrat Abbas bin Ali was the younger brother of Imam Hussein alayhi salam through a different mother. So Bibi Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha, Imam Hussein, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Bibi Zainab, Bibi Kulthum, and the baby Muhsin were all children of Bibi Fatima Zahra. But when she passed away, when she died, the Imam Ali had other wives. He married other wives, widows, and other wives who needed help. He also married a special lady from the family of, we call her Ummul Baneen. She was another Fatima. She had other children. She had 4 other sons with Hazrat Abbas being the oldest. Hazrat Abbas was the Alamdar. We call him the Alamdar of Imam Hussein's army. What does Alamdar mean? Alamdar is a person who holds a banner, who walks in front of the army. So he was the commander of the army. We consider Hazrat Abbas amongst the children of all the Imams. All of the Imams had many children. Amongst all the children of the Imams, Hazrat Abbas has the highest position. Why does Hazrat Abbas have the highest position? What was the quality of Hazrat Abbas? that gives him that status. He was the highest out of all the Imamzadeh of the Imams. So Hazrat Abbas was born on Shaban the 4th in the year 654, which year was it? 647 in Medina. As a child, he studied under Imam Ali alayhi salam, and Imam Ali used to say, "My son Abbas has learned knowledge from me when he was a child, just like a pigeon, like the kabutar, gets food from its mother." So every little grain of knowledge was fed to this child, Abbas. He was always with his father. During the 14 years that they lived together, when he was 14 years old, Imam Ali alayhi salam became Shaheed. Imam Hazrat Abbas participated in the Battle of Siffin, in which Imam Ali took place, and his bravery is well known. So Hazrat Abbas has got a couple of titles. He's known as Qamar Bani Hashim because he's so beautiful, so attractive, Moon of Bani Hashim. It's also Babul Hawaij, which means that anything that you ask with the wasila of Hazrat Abbas, Allah is bound to give you that, because he opens the door. Babul Hawaij means opens the door to desires. Whatever desires you have, ask to Hazrat Abbas. Okay, here I want Lubaba, she's not listening. Lubaba, listen to this. Hazrat Abbas married Lubaba, daughter of Ubaydullah ibn Abbas. Yeah, so there you go. There's a name that comes from Hazrat Abbas. Very important. I didn't know this. There you go.
I didn't know that.
Well, then now you do.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Lubaba is Hazrat Abbas' wife. And most of us don't know that, right?
I'm so happy to
We don't know that. Now we
make my day.
You made your day.
Thank you so
So
much.
Hazrat Abbas had 2 sons, or maybe more sons, but at least he had Abol Fadhl. So he's called Abol Fadhl because his son was Fadhl, Al-Fadhl. And his another son was Ubaydullah. They say that he had other children called Qasim, Hassan and Muhammad, and he had a daughter, but we don't hear about them much. But Ubaydullah, Qasim and Muhammad were killed in Karbala. They became Shaheed in Karbala. But Ubaydullah, his other son, survived, and the descendants of Hazrat Abbas is through Ubaydullah. So this Ubaydullah is buried in close to, where is he buried? I found it on Instagram the other day. I should have included it here. So we don't know about the Imamzadeh. So these are part of the Imamzadehs, right? Imam's children. We don't know about these ones until we look for it. So there is a son of Imam Hazrat Abbas buried there. In Iran, in Isfahan, Qom, and Zanjan, the descendants of Hazrat Abbas is buried, which means that they migrated from here. They migrated from Medina after Karbala, maybe during the time of Imam Raza alayhi salam and Bibi Fatima Masum Qom. A lot of the Ahlul Bayt descendants migrated to Iran, and that's why you find graves of Imamzadeh in Iran, not in Iraq. They're all in Iran because they migrated at the time of the 8th Imam. So yes, the story of Karbala, Imam Hazrat Abbas' story is that he was the Alamdar, he was the standard bearer and the water supplier. He supplied waters, which is why Bibi Sakina asks for her uncle to bring water, because he was guarding. He was given the responsibility of looking after the tents and the women. Even though he was the bravest and the strongest and the best warrior of them all, Imam Hussein didn't want him to go to the battlefield. He wanted to keep his sword here, but provide water to the children. Imagine how that would have felt for Hazrat Abbas, that his skills are not being used when they need it most. Imam Hussein is saying, keep your skills aside, let's get water for Sakina. How would that a warrior feel like? But did Hazrat Abbas complain about it? Never. He never said, what am I here for then? He had all of these years, he was 34 years old in Karbala. For 34 years, he had been preparing for Karbala, and he was not allowed to use his sword or his fighting skills. So that kind of dedication and trust in the Imam of your time, so Hazrat Abbas was obedient to the Imam of his time, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and that made him silent. He was totally, unconditionally obedient to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And Hazrat Abbas therefore is an example to us, because in the time of the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi Salam, Ajallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala It's that kind of obedience that is sought from us, unconditional obedience. You can't just say, oh, I can do this, I can do that, but you can't. What the Imam requires for you is what is requires from you is what you have to deliver. And Hazrat Abbas is an example of that. So I won't go through the whole of the life. I want to just give you enough so that you go and research for yourself, because everything is there on the internet. So check Hazrat Abbas ibn Ali alayhi salam. Not an Imam, but a position very close to that of an Imam. Not considered one amongst the 14 Masumeen, but a position like Bibi Zainab, very close to the position of a Masumeen. And we don't know how close that is, because all the martyrs on the Day of Judgment will be envious of the position of Hazrat Abbas. That's what they say. All the martyrs from day one till the Day of Judgment will be jealous of Prophet Hazrat Abbas's position, the honor with which he is held by the Ahlul Bayt, by all the Nabis that have come, and by Allah Himself. So I'll end it with that. In the absence, so Hazrat Abbas is an example of total obedience to the Imam of the time, and this is the kind of obedience that's expected from us towards the Imam of our time. In the absence of our Imam's physical presence, we should be totally loyal, obedient, and committed to the representative of our Imam, the Wilaya Faqih of our time. We have to be sincere followers with total trust and faith in the command. So if our Wilaya Faqih, if you know who our Wilaya Faqih is, it's actually the Rahbar. Imam Ayatollah Khamenei is a Waliya Faqih. So if he gives a command, a hukum. If he gives a hukum, you have to follow it. You can't say, excuse me, I live in Australia, so I can't follow this. You have to actually be obedient like Hazrat Abbas. And do we or can we do it? And only then is the Imam doesn't appear until all of that come together. Thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.